Welcome. And of course, we'll start with a bracha. And I can see that I need to close the blinds behind me. I'll do that first. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And we are in Parshat Bo, and we are dealing with the last 7 plagues, I believe. We started them last year, and we are into now the 10th plague and the preparations involved in that 10th plague. And at this point, what has happened is Moses has gone to warn Pharaoh. Let me think about this. I just know that he has been told by Pharaoh that he won't see him again. And this was back up here. Here's the plague of darkness. Let's see. Right. Here's the plague of darkness up here. Vayhi choshech afela, thick darkness, b'chol eretz Mitzrayim, in the entire land of Egypt. And here we have Pharaoh calling Moses, and he says to him, go serve the Lord your God. He says, just leave your sheep and your cattle. They need to stay here. I'm trying to think, Yitzhak. He says, in this case, your children can go with them. And Moses says, you yourself are going to give offerings for us to bring up, etc., etc. And he says, in fact, our cattle are going to go with us. Not a foot is going to be here, etc., etc. I just want to keep going here. And here it says, God, the Lord Hashem, strengthened Pharaoh's heart, and he didn't want to send them. He didn't care to. And here we go. This is the verse. Vayomer lo Pharaoh. So Pharaoh says to him, go from me, go hence. Hishamer lacha, be careful. Al tosef ra'ot panai. He says, do not see my face any further. Ki bayom ra'otcha panai tamut. Because on the day you see my face, you will die. So this is the plague of darkness has taken place. Pharaoh has summoned Moses and Aaron, I would certainly assume, to come and be before him. And here he's telling them they shouldn't see his face anymore. Okay? And Moses says, Kain dibarta, he says, you've in fact spoken the truth. I will not see your face again. All right. Well, at least what it means is come into his presence. And while he's there, because this is the point Rashi is going to make, is that God speaks to Moses. Moses receives this prophecy while still in the presence of Pharaoh. Okay. And there he talks about the 10th plague, that he says after that, God says to Moses, he is going to totally get rid of you. Kala gareshi gareshetchem. He's going to completely chase you out. None of you are going to be left. Right? And then he talks about the speaking to the Israelites, that a person should ask his neighbor, and a woman from her friend, her neighbor, etc. Klei chesef or klei zahav, vessels of silver and vessels of gold. And he says, and Hashem will give the chen, the grace of the people in the eyes of Egypt. So, etc., etc. Okay, so that's where we're at right now. Vayomer Moshe. So Moses says, Ko amar Hashem, thus saith the Lord, kechatzot halayla, in the middle part of the night, ani yotzei betoch Mitzrayim. This is God, of course, speaking through Moses. I shall go out in the midst of Egypt. Let's take a look at Rashi. Vayomer Moshe ko amar Hashem. Right. So Rashi immediately points out, Va'omdo lifnei Pharaoh ne'emara lo nevu'ah zo. He says, while he was still standing before Pharaoh, this prophecy was told to him. Shaharei misha yatsa milfanav, because indeed, once he left his presence, lo hosif ra'ot panav, he no longer I would translate, literally it means he would no longer see his presence, but I would say sought his presence, because Pharaoh comes and begs Moses to get out of Egypt later after the 10th plague. But Moses himself never comes back to enter Pharaoh's presence. Rashi comments on the word chatzot halayla. He gets into a grammatical issue here, okay? And he wants to translate this as a verb, okay? Kehechelak halayla, when the night, and I said, is to be divided in half. So the verb to be is understood. But the way Rashi is going to understand this is that, as it says, kechatzot halayla, when that it's an infinitive. Kechatzot, and he says, he now gives some examples of this in other places. Kechatzot, so this word kechatzot, when midnight strikes, something like that, or when that's, of course, chatzot is also understood as midnight, but what it means essentially is the middle of the night. Right? Kamo, and he gives examples. Mem Aleph is Malachim Aleph, Kings, the first book of Kings, chapter 19, Ka'alot. And that refers to a time when it was time to sacrifice.
So mine says Second Kings, but it could be a minus mistake.
Or mine is more likely to be a mistake. So, but it does say this says First Kings. Let me check Safaria quickly. I'll look at Safaria very quickly and see what it says.
Then it'll be 2 against 3.
Correct. And
I mean 2 against 1.
I have a feeling, though, that it is going to be, no, he says First Kings.
So this one's a mistake, yeah.
I think I looked it up, and actually it is First Kings.
Okay.
Because it has to do, I believe, with an incident. First Kings.
Oh, interesting. Mine says Aleph, but in the translation side, it has 2.
Okay, so you may want to just circle that in a pencil.
I can't. It's a Chabad,
All right. So when it was time to sacrifice, I'm trying to think. This, I think, is the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel, where he has this challenge to the priests of Baal, and that's what the story is about in Kings 1:19. And then it says Psalm 124. The Charot, this is one of the Shir HaMa'alot, songs of ascent. The Charot apam, so he's saying this form of the verb. Ka'alot, kechatzot, kebecharot apam banu. In their, okay, so it says, in their rage began to burn against us. When, I said in, but I should say when. I'll change that. When in, there we go. Just left out a, let's see, I need to do this again. There we go. When in their rage they began, when their rage began to burn us. I have to leave out the word. When their rage began to burn against us. That's the charot. Apam would be their rage, and banu against us. Zehu pshuto. So he is trying to understand the chatzot as a verb, right? As a verb form. Liyashvo al ofanav. He says, and this is a phrase he uses to mean to set the verse on its feet, so to speak. In other words, what he's trying to say is, this is the way to understand the straightforward meaning of this verse. She'ein chatzot shem davar, because he says this word chatzot is not a noun. By the way, the word for adjective in Hebrew, after that discussion we had the last time in discussing noun versus adjective, etc., is shem to'ar. The word, the way you describe adjective in Hebrew is shem to'ar, where the name of a description, and that's what it literally means. and Shem Davar means the name of a thing. So he says it is not the noun shel chatzi, of a half of. The Rabbotenu darshu, but our rabbis interpreted, so they gave a midrash on this, an interpretation, and this is found in the Talmud, Tractate Brachot 4, Kamo kevechatzot alayla. So he says that the way it should be understood, all right, the way Moses was saying it is ke, which would mean like in the middle of the night, okay, or when the night is divided, like when the night is divided. V'amru, and the reason for this, they said, Sha'amar Moshe kechatzot, and the reason why Moses said kechatzot, right? God said bechatzot, Moses said kechatzot, like the middle. Demashma, which would imply, if you're saying it's about midnight, is what he's saying, right? Like midnight. That implies samuchlo. In other words, it's close to midnight. Or lefanav, in other words, either a little bit before midnight, or la'acharav, or a little bit after midnight. Velo amar bechatzot, and Moses didn't use the term bechatzot. He didn't say at chatzot. Shema yit'u al itztagnine Pharaoh, lest the astrologers of Pharaoh would make a mistake in their calculation. And if he said at midnight exactly, and they made a mistake in their calculations, vayomru, they would say, Moshe badaihu. Moses is false. He's a liar.
A very minor detail. Mine says ba and ka instead of ba and
Okay. Okay.
ka chatzot.
So the difference, of course, is thank you.
Including in the text.
Yes. Let me look at here. Yep. There it is. It's very small, but it is a patach. So kachatzot. So the instead of means like the, right? It's the definite article. And at the middle of the night, in the middle of the night. Let's go on. All right. Thanks, Lauren. Let me see. Okay. Aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but the Holy One, blessed be He, Yodea Itav. God knows the exact time. God understands the absolute split second when anything comes. Itav v'urga'av, and his moments, his minutes, Amar Bachatzot. And for that reason, God said Bachatzot and not Kachatz or Kachatzot. Next verse. Umeit chol bechor be'eretz Mitzrayim, and all the firstborn will die in the land of Egypt. Mibechor Pharaoh, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, Hayoshev al Kiso, who sits on the throne, on his throne, Ad Bechor Hashivcha, and up to the firstborn of the maidservant, Asher Achar Harechaim, who sits behind, that's understood, behind the mill. V'chol Bechor Behema, and all the firstborn cattle as well. So it raises obviously some issues. So the first issue, of course, is does God have the right to do this kind of thing? That's the broad issue, and it's a very difficult, I think, for some people to be able to wrap their heads around that. But it has to do with an awareness and on the part of a believer that if in fact we understand, we start to understand, then the fact that all of creation is purely there because of the divine existence. That's part of what we understand in God being the creator. And that since God is the creator, God can both, since God gives life, God also can take life. Now, there have to be reasons for a specific action, and this is a specific action. But the truth in the final analysis is that our lives are so much in the hands of God that we don't have a right to complain and criticize in this particular case. That it all,
Rabbi,
yeah, go ahead.
could it be that because all firstborns belong to God?
Yes, I think that could be part of what it is, that the very ability to procreate is something that's such an incredible miracle.
Because they took the cattle also.
Yes. And that could also be because Pharaoh was withholding the cattle from the Israelites as well. That could be another element to it too. But the whole notion of the firstborn having that particular privilege or position has to do with the fact that it marks this transition. And also understand that being able to procreate is, in a way, a compensation for mortality. The ability to procreate. They go hand in hand. At any rate, let's go on. So Rashi does want to deal, though. I mean, we can, to the extent that we can understand, right? We can certainly understand why God would want to kill the firstborn of Pharaoh. He had warned him that he would do this, right? He says it right at the very beginning. And so Pharaoh, we understand. But why ad bechor hashevi? So it goes on to say, I guess that's it. Let me look and see. It doesn't say here. Interesting. This actually is maybe a misprint, but it does say bechor hashevi, and I don't see it here in this verse. Doesn't say anything that. So this verse may be in the wrong place, because this may be describing actually when it takes place, and that's where it may say ad bechor hashevi. So this particular comment, I think I'm looking to see, unless wait a second.
Yeah, mine's here too. And you're right, it doesn't say it, but
one moment. Does it say it? Maybe it says it earlier on. Nope, doesn't say that. It doesn't. So my guess is that it has to do that when we read a little later on about the actual performance of this this makkah, right? This plague, that's where it says ad bechor hashevi. That's where it uses that verse. And regardless, he's going to deal with the issue. Lama laku hashvuyim. So he asks and says, why would, the shevi means the captive, right? In other words, people whom the Egyptians had captured. We aren't even talking about Egyptians necessarily here. So why would they also be punished, so to speak? Lama lakoshvim, kidei shelo yomru yiratam tav'a elbonam. The reason for this is that people shouldn't say, if they were spared, if the captive firstborn were spared, people might think that literally it means their fear, the one they fear, that is their God or their gods. No, it's their God. Tava elbonam. In other words, requited the humiliation that they had experienced as captives, or demanded compensation for their humiliation. Vehevia puranut al Mitzrayim, that it was some other factor. We know that one of them, and perhaps it is, the major reason for these plagues, because there's more than one reason, was for people to recognize the one divine source of everything. That is, in fact, ultimately what was trying to be achieved through these plagues. And so any possibility that someone might assume or infer something else wasn't appropriate. Now he gets into the verse itself. So this is interesting. Yes, go ahead, please.
I wanted to mention that Bechor, the Dibur Matchil, which isn't exactly the same as what's in the verse.
Yes, he's just let me explain the.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, Sherbeth, let me just explain quickly for those who are new to this that Dibur HaMatchil refers to the catchphrase from the text. I'm pointing it out now. That is used as a reference point for the commentary. So go ahead, please. Please go.
Okay, so I have the Silberman.
Yes.
Silberman edition, and he says, he puts into his translation of in parentheses says, these words are used in chapter 12, verse 29, instead of Ad Bechor Hashivcha.
Yes.
In this verse. And then in the back of the book, he has an appendix and he says, he mentions other scholars, they don't have a satisfactory reason why this passage is placed here. And his suggestion is that it's just a very natural place to put it because it's, if you're asking, well, why the firstborn of the handmaids, why the firstborn of the slaves, the captives, it goes together. Although it does look like a mistake, when we look at it.
And it simply could be. Mistakes do happen. And especially a copyist, that if this is, it could be that one of the manuscripts or the printed editions, right, there are definitely, there's major work that's been done in terms of various texts of the Bible and certainly of the commentators as well. And so there are actually books that preserve all the differences in these various editions. Of course, we're handling it as being, this is the authoritative edition, and we're not going into that kind of minutia, but for sure, in all this material, because so much of it initially was hand copied and errors could creep in, and there are really serious scholarship involved in trying to come up with a text that is considered an authoritative text.
Right.
But, yeah. So I'm comfortable with that, without finding a better reason, just simply saying it's clear that this could happen easily. But so it's nice that Silverman also points that out.
Yeah.
But we discovered it ourselves, so that's okay. All right. Let's see. Okay, here it goes.
It is. I just looked ahead, and that's the way it's there. It's like the captive as opposed to the slave person. So maybe it's just reminding us that the slaves are captives, and that way you didn't have to do it twice.
Yeah, right. It could be. It's just that. Why didn't it say, Bechor Hashivcha, whatever it is that says up here, right?
Slaves are next anyway.
Yeah, Shivcha, Asher Charech.
29, where that happens, if you need to make a note of it.
And chapter 12 is where this happens. Where this all
Correct.
happens.
12, verse 29.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going on here with this. Mi Bechor Paor, etc., from the firstborn of Pharaoh, etc., Ad Bechor Hashivcha, and now, of course, it does say Bechor Hashivcha, right? The firstborn of the maidservant. Kol this is a pay. Kol hapchutim mi Bechor Paro. In other words, what it's doing is it's giving the entire, right, the broad spectrum of those who are going to be stricken by this plague. And so it's saying all who are less than the firstborn of Pharaoh, and the chashuvim, and more important, mi bechor habshivcha hayu b'chlal. In other words, it's giving us the extremities, but actually including all in between as well. V'lama laku b'nei hashvachot. But now he goes and says, why were the children of the maidservants stricken with this plague? She'af. So this is a different question, but notice a similar phrase. Lama laku hashvoyim up there, and he's asking the same kind of question. She'af heim hayu mishabdim bahem, because he's saying that they too forced the Israelites to serve them. Usmechim betzaratam, and they were happy, they rejoiced at the troubles of the Israelites. In the Tzores, right? Bechor behema, and all the firstborn of cattle. Why? Again, these are good questions, right? Lefi shehayu ovdin la. The reason is because they worshipped them. They worshipped this cattle. Ukishahakadosh Baruch Hu nifra min ha'umot. And when the Holy One, blessed be He, avenges the nations, and basically what it means is exacts punishment from the nations. Nifra me Eloheha. He also exacts punishment, if you could say that, from its gods. And that's from a midrash called the Mechilta. So we see this comment comes, these comments from Rashi come from a very broad spectrum of earlier material that comments on the Bible.
So it's saying that the animals were gods.
Yes,
And that's why they had to be killed.
Correct. Because again, the punishment for idolatry. That's the idea. I'm going to put in the mark for us for tomorrow, God willing. Very good. I'm going to stop the share and stop the recording.